Thank you, Cancorla. Firstly, I'd like to take this opportunity and...
Kenny, you've 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, I won't take the full 10 minutes. I'd like to take this opportunity and...
Yeah, you actually can take up to 20, Deputy Kenny, if you want to.
Okay, well, I'm right. I'd like to take this opportunity, and I think it's fitting that yourself is in the chair at this particular moment. I'd like to thank the electorate of Dublin North East for re-electing me to this Dáil after a 14 years absence. And unlike Deputy Flanagan, I didn't have to do any community service order, but I did lose my seat 14 years ago, and it's a bit like having to do. I'd like to also take this opportunity to pay tribute to those members who lost their seats in the last general elections. There was quite a lot of them. And I'm sure they're probably going through a difficult time, and I'd like to empathise with them, having gone through that process myself, and just to assure them that, in fact, it is possible to get back here again. I'd like to welcome this bill, Minister, and I particularly like to welcome the section in the bill which requires that if an offender has been convicted and the court is of the opinion that a sentence of imprisonment of up to 12 months would be appropriate, the court will consider as an alternative to that sentence the imposition of a community service order. This, I believe, Cancorla, is a very progressive improvement on the existing legislation. I understand that a review of the community service orders under a value for money scheme, on a value for money basis, was conducted in 2009, and that review found that the scheme was not being utilised to its fullest extent, the capacity wasn't being taken up, and that there was potential for significant financial savings could be made by imposing community service orders as an alternative to custody in sentencing for minor offences for which a sentence of up to 12 months may be appropriate. And of course, the imposition of the community service orders would also have positive impacts for the offender himself or herself, and for the community benefiting from the work that was carried out. The Irish Penal Reform Trust has welcomed the introduction of the bill. I believe that they believe, and they say, that the proposed bill can make a real difference to a number of problems within the Irish justice system. And they point out a number of things, and they point out that the Irish prison population has doubled since 1997. They point out that sentences committals rose by 35% in 2009. That's the last year they had figures for, and that was up from 8,000 in 2008 to nearly 11,000 in 2009. And they also point out that 70% of the sentenced committals in 2009 were for 6 months or less. And they also point out that there were over 3,600 committals for road traffic offences in 2009, representing over 33%, a third of the total. And this was an increase on almost 60% from 2008. So the Penal Reform Trust also argued that community sanctions are much cheaper than imprisonment, obviously, and with certain categories of offenders are demonstrably more effective with lower levels of re-offending. I think this is of crucial importance in looking at this bill. Cancorla, in 1991, 20 years ago, I was Lord Mayor of Dublin, and I was granted permission at that time by the Minister for Justice to visit Mountjoy Prison following a number of deaths by suicide in the prison. And Deputy Flanagan has talked about his experiences in Castlereagh, so I'll now talk about my experience in visiting Mountjoy. And I visited under different circumstances, I have to say. But when I visited the prison, I met the prison governor, John Lonergan, and his prison staff, and they allowed me to visit all of the areas of the prison that I wished to visit. And I have to say, at that time, 20 years ago, I was appalled by the conditions I saw in the prison 20 years ago. And I believe, regrettably, that very little has changed in the intervening period, except that the overcrowding in the prison has actually increased. I think the building of a replacement prison in Mountjoy is still being awaited, despite all of the concerns expressed. I met some prisoners at that time who were in prison for offences like not having car tax, and having no motor insurance. And I found through discussions with the prisoners that the literacy problems seemed to play a large part in the situations that they got themselves into with car tax and insurance and all of that kind of thing. And I also met quite a number of members of the travelling community who were in prison at that time. I think these people would have been better served, in my view, by being placed on community service orders rather than being incarcerated in Mountjoy Prison at that time. And I want to take this opportunity to commend to this House the record of John Lonergan as a humane and fair governor of Mountjoy Prison. As a member of Dublin City Council up to 6 weeks ago, I want to talk about the use of the community service orders by local authorities and by Dublin City Council in particular, and I was also a member of the Joint Policing Committee of Dublin City Council, and I'm aware that sanctions are needed to deal with situations where people get involved in antisocial activity or crime, and that there's no getting away from that. Just to talk about the use of community service orders by local authorities, the former Minister for Justice, Michael McDowell, brought in a scheme in 2000, for the removal of graffiti in Dublin City through his department, and unfortunately it was withdrawn in 2009 because of cutbacks. But in the year 2008 alone, in the Dublin City Council North Central area, which is the area that I represented at that time, $250,000 was spent by the City Council in removing graffiti in the North Central area. And the withdrawal of that scheme in 2009 has left a gap in the services provided to remove graffiti, and I think the reintroduction of that scheme again through the CSOs would be welcome. At the moment, Cancorla, preparations are being made for the visit of the Queen of England to Dublin, and there has been some evidence, unfortunately, recently of the daubing of graffiti in public areas by people opposing the visit, and I think extra resources needed to be put in place to stop this kind of unwelcome activity. And Dublin City Council's public domain officers tell me that they have a list of community projects which could be implemented through an expansion of the CSO scheme for the benefit of the community and for the benefit of the voluntary sector. There is plenty of capacity to utilise the scheme in a better way, doing work in the voluntary community sector. Just to give one or two examples, Cancorla, of the kind of work that has been done. The Stardust Park in Coolock, which you will know yourself, has been repainted recently. The railings in St Anne's Park has been repainted. The local communities in these areas are very appreciative of this kind of work, and they're also appreciative of the effort that the participants in the schemes have put in to doing this kind of work. And I think it's a very positive thing. There is also, Cancorla, some anecdotal evidence that sometimes dialogue takes place between the participants in the scheme and youths who may have created the graffiti or litter or whatever in the first place, and that this dialogue can sometimes have a positive outcome of ending the antisocial activity. In conclusion, Cancorla, I'm aware that there has been some objection to the works carried out through this scheme, mainly from contractors, painting contractors and others. However, I think when you bear in mind that the type of work that's carried out under this scheme is carried out in the community and voluntary sector, it's work that would not otherwise be done. So I don't think it can be argued that it's doing anybody out of a job or it's taking up somebody else's work. I think it also has to be said that the local authorities very often provide a lot of the materials that are used in these schemes, so that there is very little cost to the community and voluntary sector who are the main beneficiaries of this work. So I welcome the bill, Cancorla.